Welcome to African Tales and Hearts, where stories of love, family, and destiny come alive. Today, I have a tale that will make you question everything you think you know about love, worth, and destiny. This is the story about a love that bloomed in the most unexpected soil. And sometimes, the person meant for you is hiding in plain sight. But every great love story has roots that run deep, and to understand why Simon made the choice that shocked an entire community, we must first journey back to where it all began in the red soil of Ondo State, where dreams were planted alongside yams, and a boy learned that true wealth isn't measured in naira and kobo, but in the strength of your character and the size of your heart. Let me take you back to a time when Simon was just a village boy, with calloused hands and impossible dreams. In the heart of Ondo State, where morning mist kisses cassava leaves and roosters serve as nature's alarm clocks, lived a family that understood the true meaning of wealth. Papa Samuel Adebayo was the kind of man who spoke with his actions more than his words. His hands told stories of 30 years spent coaxing life from reluctant soil, fingers permanently stained with earth that had fed 3 generations of his family. Every morning, before dawn, you could find him in his fields, talking to his crops like they were his children, because, in many ways, they were. Mama Grace, his wife, was a woman whose beauty wasn't in her face, though she was lovely, but in her spirit. She ran a small provision store that was barely bigger than a modern bathroom, selling everything from Maggie cubes to exercise books, from palm oil to pencils. Her customers didn't just come for goods, they came for her smile that could cure headaches, and her advice that could mend broken hearts. Young Simon grew up in this home where love was the main ingredient in every meal, where prayers were said not just before eating, but before planting, before harvesting, before any major decision. He learned to read by the light of kerosene lamps, because electricity was still a visitor that came and went as it pleased. But Simon's parents had a secret weapon against poverty's vision. While their neighbors saw only today's struggles, Papa Samuel and Mama Grace saw tomorrow's possibilities. They looked at their son and saw not just a farmer's boy, but a future that could break generational chains of limitation. Education is the inheritance we can give our son that no one can steal. Mama Grace would whisper to her husband during their late-night planning sessions, counting and recounting the meager coins they had saved. The decision that would change Simon's life forever came on a Tuesday evening, when the harmattan wind was blowing dreams across the landscape. Simon was 15, tall for his age, with muscles already shaped by farm work, and eyes bright with curiosity about the world beyond his village. Papa Samuel called a family meeting the kind where everyone sits on mats in the compound while kerosene lamps flicker like dancing spirits. The conversation that followed would echo through generations. "My son," Papa Samuel began, his voice heavy with the weight of difficult love, "the school in our village can only take you so far. But Cousin John in Lagos has agreed to let you stay with him, so you can attend a proper secondary school." Simon's heart dropped like a stone into deep water. Leave home? Leave the only world he had ever known? Leave his parents, who needed his help on the farm? Mama Grace, seeing her son's confusion, took his hands in hers, hands that smelled like palm kernel oil and unconditional love. "Simon, we are not sending you away because we don't want you here. We are sending you toward a future we cannot give you in this village." The next morning, as Simon packed his few belongings into a Ganamusco bag, one of those large, checkered travel bags that had survived more journeys than a Lagos Danfo bus, the entire compound gathered to see him off. Neighbors brought small gifts, a bar of soap here, a packet of biscuits there, prayers wrapped in hugs, and blessings folded into handshakes. Papa Samuel pulled his son aside for their final father-to-son conversation before the journey. "Simon, where you are going, you will meet people who have more than us. Do not let their plenty make you feel small. Remember, a diamond's value doesn't depend on the box it comes in." As the old Toyota Hiace that would carry Simon to his new life coughed to life, Mama Grace pressed something into her son's palm, a small wooden cross, carved by his grandfather's hands and polished smooth by 3 generations of prayers. "When the city tries to change who you are," she whispered through tears that fell like benedictions, "remember whose son you are." Lagos hit Simon like a tsunami of noise, smells, and possibilities. Cousin John's one-bedroom apartment in Surrey became his new world, a world where he slept on a mat in the sitting room, shared bathroom space with 5 other tenants, and learned to navigate Okadas, motorcycle taxis, through traffic that moved like stubborn cattle. But every hardship was bearable because Simon carried his parents' sacrifice in his heart like a sacred flame. While his new classmates complained about their BlackBerry being too slow or their parents being too strict, Simon remembered his father's bleeding hands during harvest season and found strength to study harder. Every weekend, Simon would call home from a roadside cell phone, places where a person sits under an umbrella, charging people for use of their phone, paying 20 naira for the phone, to the lady, after a 5-minute call that connected him to voices that sounded like home. Papa Samuel would update him on the farm, which crops were doing well, which ones needed prayer, how many yams they had harvested. Mama Grace would ask about his studies, his health, whether he was eating enough, whether he was remembering to pray. And every month, like clockwork, a small package would arrive, care packages containing dried fish, palm oil and plastic bottles, groundnuts wrapped in old newspapers, and always, always, a handwritten note from Mama Grace. Study hard, but don't study away your heart. Remember who you are. By the time Simon finished secondary school with grades that made his teachers beam with pride, he had learned something more valuable than any lesson in textbooks. He had learned that where you come from doesn't determine where you're going, but it should always remind you why you're going there. And as he prepared for university entrance exams, Simon made himself a promise that would guide every decision he made for the rest of his life. Success would never make him forget his roots, and wealth would never make him look down on others who were still climbing the mountain he had climbed. The lessons learned in red soil would one day become the compass that guides us through our most important decisions. It was during his second year that Clara Emanite walked into Simon's life like sunrise after a long night. She was studying economics in the faculty next to agriculture, and their first encounter happened in the most mundane of places, the university library during examination period. Clara was the kind of beautiful that made conversations stop mid-sentence and caused otherwise intelligent men to walk into glass doors. Her skin was smooth and radiant, her hair always perfectly styled, and she moved with the confidence of someone who had never been told she wasn't extraordinary. She dressed well without being flashy, spoke with the refined accent of someone from a good family, and carried herself like she was destined for greatness. Simon first noticed her struggling with a statistics assignment that looked like a foreign language written in mathematical symbols. She sat alone at a table surrounded by textbooks, her brow furrowed in concentration, occasionally sighing in frustration. Other male students had offered to help, but she had politely declined their advances, sensing their ulterior motives. Simon approached differently. He didn't lead with charm or compliments. Instead, he simply said, "Statistics can be tricky. Would you like me to explain that concept? I'm pretty good with numbers." Clara looked up, taking in this tall, well-built young man with kind eyes and calloused hands that spoke of real work. There was something refreshingly honest about his offer, no smooth lines, no obvious agenda, just a genuine desire to help. "You would do that?" Clara asked, surprised by his straightforward approach. For the next 2 hours, Simon patiently walked Clara through statistical concepts, explaining complex formulas in simple terms, using examples that made sense. He didn't try to impress her with his knowledge, he simply shared it generously, the way his parents had taught him to share everything else. As Clara finally understood the concepts that had been frustrating her for days, she found herself studying Simon's face more than the textbook. He had strong features that suggested character rather than mere handsomeness, and when he smiled, it reached his eyes in a way that made her feel like she was the only person in the crowded library. "Thank you," Clara said when they finished. "You're different from other guys here." "Different how?" Simon asked, genuinely curious. "Most of them want something immediately. You just helped because I needed help." That conversation sparked something that grew slowly, like a plant taking root in good soil. Clara began seeking Simon out for study sessions, then for conversations over lunch, then for walks around campus when the evening air was cool and the pressure of academics felt lighter. Clara came from what Nigerians politely call a comfortable background. Her father owned a successful printing business in Lagos, and her mother was a senior civil servant, a prestigious government position that commanded respect in their community. They weren't wealthy enough to be called rich, but they were secure enough to never worry about basic needs. Clara had grown up expecting certain standards: good schools, nice clothes, frequent family vacations, and the assumption that her future would be even more comfortable than her present. Dating Simon challenged Clara's expectations in ways she hadn't anticipated. He was intelligent, respectful, and genuinely caring, but he was also clearly from a different economic reality. When they went on dates, he chose local restaurants over expensive ones, not because he was cheap, but because his budget was limited. When she mentioned wanting something, he would encourage her to save for it rather than offering to buy it for her. At first, Clara found Simon's approach refreshing. Here was a man who saw her as more than a prize to be won with expensive gifts. He listened to her dreams of working in international development, encouraged her academic ambitions, and treated her opinions with respect. Their conversations ranged from economics and agriculture to philosophy and their hopes for Nigeria's future. But as months passed, Clara began to feel the gap between Simon's world and the world she aspired to inhabit. When her friends talked about their boyfriends' cars, designer gifts, and expensive dates, Clara had stories about meaningful conversations and genuine affection. When they showed off jewelry and clothes their men had bought them, Clara had memories of shared meals and long walks that cost nothing but meant everything. The disparity became more apparent during social events. When Clara's classmates organized parties or trips that required significant spending, Simon would politely decline or suggest less expensive alternatives. When Clara needed money for projects or emergencies, Simon would give what he could, but it was never enough to solve problems completely, only enough to help. Clara began making subtle requests that grew less subtle over time. "Simon, I need to contribute 2,000 naira, about $5, for my friend's birthday gift. Can you help?" Or, "My phone needs credit for an important call to my parents. Do you have 1,000 naira, about $2.50, I can borrow?" Or, "There's a seminar I really want to attend, but the registration fee is 5,000 naira, about $12. Simon gave what he could, often sacrificing his own needs to meet Clara's requests. When he couldn't provide what she asked for, he apologized with the sincerity of someone confessing genuine failures. Clara would accept his apologies graciously, kiss his cheek, and assure him that she understood his situation. But deep in Clara's heart, a seed of dissatisfaction was taking root. She loved Simon's character, respected his intelligence, and was genuinely attracted to him as a person. But she also couldn't ignore the voice in her head that whispered about the kind of life she wanted, a life that required more resources than Simon seemed capable of providing. The moment that would haunt Clara's memory came during her friend Ruth's party. As she watched other girls receive expensive gifts from their boyfriends, Simon quietly handed her a small wrapped package. Inside was a handmade bookmark with her favorite Bible verse carefully written in his neat handwriting. It was beautiful, thoughtful, and cost almost nothing. Clara smiled and thanked him, but in her heart, she felt a pang of something she couldn't name. Was it disappointment or shame? She wasn't sure, and that uncertainty frightened her more than any clear answer would have. As their relationship continued through Simon's remaining university years, Clara found herself caught between her genuine affection for Simon and her growing awareness that love alone might not be enough to build the future she envisioned for herself. But university was just the beginning of their story. The choices that lay ahead would reveal the true nature of their characters in ways neither of them could imagine. Simon graduated from the University of Ibadan with first-class honors, the highest academic achievement, an accomplishment that sent waves of celebration through his village and brought tears of joy to his parents' eyes. His final year project on sustainable palm oil production had impressed his professors so much that Dr. Adeyemi recommended him for several agricultural development programs. Clara graduated 6 months later with a respectable second-class upper degree in economics. By then, the cracks in their relationship had already begun to show. During Simon's final semester, Clara had become increasingly distant, often canceling their planned meetings and taking longer to return his calls. The distance became more pronounced when they both left for their respective youth service postings, the mandatory one-year national service program. Simon was sent to Rivers State Agricultural Development Program, while Clara was posted to serve in Kaduna State with a microfinance institution. What had once been daily phone conversations dwindled to weekly check-ins, then to sporadic messages that felt more obligatory than affectionate. Simon threw himself into his youth service with genuine passion, working alongside experienced agriculturalists and local farmers. His approach to pest management using organic compounds increased crop yields by 30% in the pilot farms where he worked. Local farmers, initially skeptical of this young graduate with his textbook knowledge, began seeking his advice as they witnessed the results of his methods. Meanwhile, Clara's calls became increasingly infrequent. When she did call, their conversations felt strained and perfunctory. By the time Simon's youth service was ending, his contact with Clara had dwindled to occasional text messages. The relationship that had sustained them through 3 years of university had quietly died during their year of service, killed not by dramatic arguments but by Clara's gradual withdrawal and loss of interest. Simon felt the sting of Clara's abandonment, but he channeled his energy into productive pursuits. He had learned to recognize when someone was no longer invested in a relationship, and he refused to chase after affection that was no longer freely given. During his service year, Simon began having serious conversations with Papa Samuel about the future of their family land. The Adebayo family had inherited 120 acres, about 49 hectares, of fertile land from Simon's great-grandfather, a man who had possessed the foresight to acquire property when it was still considered worthless bush. "Papa," Simon said one Saturday evening as they sat under the mango tree that had sheltered 3 generations of family discussions, "what would you think about expanding our palm oil production?" Simon explained his vision. Palm oil was becoming increasingly valuable both locally and internationally. The techniques he had learned and refined during his service year could transform their modest farm into a significant agricultural enterprise. But such an expansion would require capital they didn't currently possess. The solution, Simon proposed, was both simple and difficult. They could sell a portion of their ancestral land to fund the transformation of the remainder into a modern palm oil plantation. Mama Grace supported the idea with characteristic wisdom. "We can hold onto all the land and remain as we are," she said during one family discussion, "or we can use part of the land to create something that will benefit many generations to come." This suggestion led to 3 months of family meetings that stretched deep into many nights. The decision to sell any portion of ancestral land was not taken lightly in their culture. Land was more than property, it was heritage, identity, and security rolled into one. Finally, after much deliberation, Papa Samuel made the decision that would change their family's trajectory. They would sell 20 acres of their land to fund the development of the remaining 100 acres into a modern palm oil plantation. With this capital, Simon and Papa Samuel began the careful process of transforming their remaining land. They purchased high-quality palm seedlings, modern irrigation equipment, and hired experienced plantation workers. Simon applied the scientific methods he had learned in university, while Papa Samuel contributed the practical wisdom that comes from decades of working the soil. After completing his youth service, Simon secured employment with an agricultural consulting firm in Lagos. The job provided steady income and kept him connected to the latest developments in agricultural technology. But his heart remained with the family plantation, and he spent every weekend and holiday working alongside Papa Samuel. The first year was challenging. Palm trees take time to mature, and the initial investment was substantial. The second year brought encouragement as the palm trees established strong root systems. The third year marked the beginning of their success. The palm trees began producing fruit in quantities that exceeded their most optimistic projections. As the plantation's reputation grew within their region, Simon found himself consulted by other farmers interested in improving their own operations. He generously shared his knowledge, helping neighbors implement techniques that could benefit their families as well. But success didn't change Simon's character. When he purchased his first car, a modest Toyota Corolla, he drove it to the village to show his parents before using it in Lagos. When the plantation's profits allowed him to build a new house for Papa Samuel and Mama Grace, he chose a comfortable but not ostentatious design that reflected their values. When young Bayo from the neighboring village approached Simon with tears in his eyes, explaining that his father couldn't afford his university fees, Simon quietly paid the entire amount. Education is not a privilege, he told the grateful boy, it's a responsibility we owe to each other. Simon created employment for young people in his community, supported local schools with donations of books and supplies, and established a small fund to help promising students who couldn't afford university fees. One evening, as Simon watched the sunset paint the palm trees golden, he thought about Clara for the first time in months. Not with pain or longing, but with gratitude. Her rejection had forced him to discover who he truly was when he wasn't trying to be enough for someone else. Sometimes, he realized, the greatest gifts come disguised as losses. As Simon approached his mid-20s, he had achieved financial security and professional recognition within his agricultural community. He carried these successes lightly, still taking public transportation when traveling within Lagos and maintaining the same humble character his parents had instilled in him. He had built a life of purpose and prosperity. He was content, fulfilled, and at peace with his past. 4. Years after their relationship had quietly died through Clara's gradual withdrawal, Simon found himself in Victoria Island, Lagos's business district, for a meeting with potential buyers. As he walked out of the gleaming office building on Amadou Bello Way, adjusting his simple but well-tailored shirt and checking his phone for his next appointment, Simon nearly collided with a woman stepping out of a black Toyota Camry at the curb. "Simon? Simon Adebayo?" The voice made him look up sharply. Standing before him was Clara, but not the Clara he remembered from university. This Clara wore a perfectly fitted business suit that whispered expensive secrets, her hair was styled in a sleek bob that framed her face elegantly, and she carried herself with the polished confidence of someone who had found her place in the corporate world. "Clara." Simon's voice carried surprise mixed with something that might have been caution. "You look, well." Clara steadied his face, taking in the changes 4 years had brought. Simon had filled out more, his shoulders broader, his presence more settled and confident. He looked successful in an understated way that intrigued her. "You too," Clara replied, her smile warm but calculating. "What brings you to Victoria Island?" "Business meeting," Simon answered simply, offering no details. They stood there for a moment, the Lagos traffic providing a noisy backdrop to their unexpected reunion. Clara glanced at her expensive watch, then back at Simon. "Do you have time for lunch? There's a nice restaurant nearby." The restaurant Clara led him to was one of those upscale establishments in Victoria Island that catered to Lagos's business elite. Over jollof rice, a popular West African dish, and grilled fish, they caught up on the years that had separated them. Clara spoke enthusiastically about her career trajectory. After youth service, the mandatory national service program, she had secured a position with a prominent commercial bank in Lagos, starting as a junior relationship manager and working her way up through determination and strategic networking. "I'm now a senior relationship manager," Clara said with evident pride. "I handle some of our biggest corporate accounts. The salary is excellent, and I'm being considered for a promotion to assistant manager." Simon listened, nodding appreciatively at her achievements. Clara had always been ambitious, and it seemed she was building the successful urban career she had always envisioned. "What about you?" Clara asked, cutting her fish with practiced elegance. "Are you still farming?" There it was again, that slight pause before the word farming, as if she were mentioning something mildly embarrassing. Simon noticed it but chose not to react. "Yes, I work in agriculture," he replied simply, offering no details about the scale or success of his operations. As Clara spoke about her corporate success, Simon found himself remembering the young woman who had once asked him for 2,000 naira for a friend's birthday gift. Now she was casually ordering meals that cost more than his father's weekly income used to be. The irony wasn't lost on him, she was impressed with her own success while sitting across from someone whose monthly income could probably cover her annual salary. But Simon had learned the value of letting people reveal themselves in their own time. Clara nodded politely at his agricultural work, but Simon could see she was already losing interest. She changed the subject to ask about mutual friends from university, sharing gossip about classmates who had married, gotten prestigious jobs, or moved abroad. When Clara offered to drop him off at his next appointment, Simon politely declined and called an Uber instead. As his ride pulled up, Clara stood beside her gleaming Camry, watching him with puzzled interest. "It was good seeing you again, Clara," Simon said as he opened the Uber door. "You too, Simon. We should stay in touch this time." Over the following weeks, Clara began reaching out to Simon regularly. Their initial phone conversations were light and friendly, catching up on lost time and sharing updates about their current lives. Clara seemed genuinely interested in reconnecting, though Simon noticed she always showed little enthusiasm when he mentioned his agricultural work. "So farming is treating you well?" Clara would ask during their evening phone calls, her tone polite but disinterested. "It keeps me busy and provides for my needs," Simon would reply, never elaborating on the true extent of his success. What Clara didn't realize was that Simon was deliberately keeping details about his financial situation private. His experience with success had taught him to be cautious about people's motivations, especially those who had previously shown little interest in his agricultural pursuits. As their conversations became more frequent, Clara began to assess Simon's current situation. She had expected to find him struggling in some rural farming operation, barely making ends meet. Instead, she found a man who seemed content and confident, who dressed well without being flashy, and who carried himself with quiet authority. What Clara couldn't understand was why Simon seemed so unbothered by her obvious success. In her experience, men either felt intimidated by her achievements or tried to compete with stories of their own accomplishments. Simon did neither. He simply listened, congratulated her genuinely, and offered no comparisons. It was either the confidence of someone who had nothing to prove, or the resignation of someone who had nothing to compete with. Clara couldn't decide which, and that uncertainty bothered her more than she cared to admit. "You never really tell me much about your work," Clara mentioned during one of their conversations. "How many people do you employ? What kind of crops do you focus on?" "Just basic farming operations," Simon would respond vaguely. "Nothing too exciting for someone in the banking sector like yourself." Clara's curiosity was piqued, but Simon's consistent deflection told her that either his agricultural work was very modest or he was naturally private about business matters. After several months of renewed contact, Clara made a decision that reflected her elevated status at the bank. She had recently received another promotion, along with a salary increase that made her feel financially secure and confident about her future prospects. "I'm thinking of getting my own place," Clara announced to Simon during one of their phone conversations. "Something bigger and more suitable for my new position." Simon congratulated her on the promotion and expressed support for her housing plans. "With my new responsibilities at work, I think I'll need to make some lifestyle adjustments," Clara continued. "More professional entertaining, better presentation for my career advancement." Simon listened supportively, noting how Clara's priorities remained focused on status and appearances, much as they had been during their university years. As they maintained their careful dance of reconnection, both Simon and Clara were building assumptions that would soon collide with reality. Sometimes the most dangerous misunderstandings are the ones we create about people we think we already know. Clara saw Simon as the same modest farmer she remembered, perhaps doing slightly better than during university but still limited by his rural focus and apparent lack of ambition for urban success. Simon saw Clara as the same status-conscious woman from their past, now more polished and successful but still primarily concerned with appearances and material advancement. While Clara was making plans for her upgraded lifestyle and Simon was carefully managing their renewed acquaintance, across Lagos another story was unfolding that would intersect with theirs in ways none of them could foresee. Vivian Okon was 22 years old. But her eyes carried the weight of someone who had lived several lifetimes. She had the kind of beauty that was both striking and understated, smooth dark skin that seemed to glow from within, intelligent eyes that missed nothing, and a smile that could light up a room when she had reason to use it. Unfortunately, reasons for smiling had become increasingly rare in Vivian's world. Vivian came from Cross River State in southeastern Nigeria, from a family that had always struggled but never stopped dreaming. Her father, Mr. Joe Ocone, was a skilled mechanic who could resurrect dead engines and make broken-down vehicles purr like new ones. His small workshop in their neighborhood was always busy with customers who trusted his expertise, but the money from his work barely covered their family's basic needs. Her mother, Mrs. Emily Ocone, had been a seamstress with gifted hands who could transform simple fabric into beautiful clothing. She had dreams of expanding her business, maybe even opening a proper tailoring shop someday. But fate had other plans for the Ocone family. When Vivian was 13 years old, her mother became pregnant again after many years of trying to give Vivian a sibling. The family was cautiously optimistic about the new addition to their household. But childbirth proved more complicated than anyone expected. Emily Ocone died giving birth to Vivian's younger brother, Stanley, leaving behind a 13-year-old daughter and a newborn son with a husband who suddenly had to learn how to be both father and mother. From the age of 13, Vivian transformed from a typical teenager into the woman of the house. While her classmates worried about homework and friendships, Vivian was learning to care for a newborn baby, manage household responsibilities, and help her grieving father navigate single parenthood. She would wake up at dawn to prepare formula for baby Stanley, get herself ready for school, and then rush home during lunch breaks to check on him. After school, she would take over Stanley's care completely, allowing their father to work longer hours in his workshop to provide for their reduced family. But Vivian was exceptional in ways that couldn't be measured by her circumstances. Despite her additional responsibilities, she continued to excel academically. She absorbed knowledge like dry ground absorbs rain, excelled in every subject, and dreamed of using education as her ladder out of poverty. Vivian has the kind of mind that comes along once in a generation, her secondary school principal, Mrs. Adiz, told her father during a parent-teacher conference. If you can keep her in school, she will go places that will amaze us all. Mr. Ocone worked even longer hours, sometimes sleeping in his workshop to save transportation money, all to ensure Vivian could continue her education. By the time Stanley was walking and talking, he was more like Vivian's son than her brother, calling her sister Vivi and running to her for comfort when he was hurt or scared. When Vivian gained admission to study software engineering at the University of Ife, one of Nigeria's premier universities, her father and brother were happy and proud. To pay Vivian's first-year fees, Mr. Ocone sold his most valuable tools, the same tools that put food on their table. Neighbors contributed what they could, understanding that when one child in the community succeeds, everyone rises a little higher. Vivian threw herself into her studies with the intensity of someone who understood that education was not a privilege but a responsibility. While her classmates worried about the latest fashion trends or weekend parties, Vivian focused on programming languages, software development theories, and building the technical skills that would eventually lift her family out of poverty. She was in her third year, maintaining grades that impressed even her most demanding professors, when life decided to test her resolve in the cruelest possible way. It started with a cough that Mr. Ocone dismissed as nothing serious. "Just too much dust from the workshop," he would say, waving away Vivian's concerns during their weekend phone calls. But when 12-year-old Stanley mentioned, during one of their calls, that their father was coughing up blood, Vivian abandoned her studies for a long weekend to return home. What she found alarmed her deeply. Mr. Ocone had lost significant weight, his skin had taken on a grayish pallor, and the cough seemed to drain his strength with each episode. The hospital tests revealed the devastating truth: advanced lung cancer, likely caused by years of exposure to vehicle exhaust fumes and workshop chemicals without proper protective equipment. "We need to start treatment immediately," the oncologist explained to Vivian. "The cancer is aggressive, but with chemotherapy and radiation, we can extend his life and improve its quality." The cost of treatment was staggering, more money than their family had seen in their entire lifetime combined. Vivian made the decision without hesitation. She withdrew from university immediately, not because she wanted to, but because her father needed care that only she could provide. "You cannot drop out because of me," Mr. Ocone protested weakly from his hospital bed. "Your education is too important." "Papa, my education means nothing if I lose you," Vivian replied firmly. "Stanley needs his father, and I can return to school later. Right now, you need me." For the next 8 months, Vivian became her father's primary caregiver while taking on multiple jobs to pay for treatment costs, cleaning offices at night, selling cooked food during the day, and doing computer repairs for neighbors who knew about her technical skills. Every naira, Nigerian currency, she earned went toward medications, hospital bills, and keeping Stanley in school. Despite all their efforts, despite the medical treatments and Vivian's devotion, Mr. Okon's condition continued to deteriorate. On a quiet Tuesday morning, with Vivian holding one hand and 13-year-old Stanley holding the other, Mr. Okon passed away peacefully. His last words were directed to both his children: take care of each other. Stanley, listen to your sister, she sacrificed everything for our family. Vivian, make sure he finishes school. And never give up on your own dreams. At 22, Vivian had learned that true strength isn't measured by what you can acquire, but by what you're willing to sacrifice for those you love. She had no way of knowing that this lesson would soon become the foundation for choices that would change her life forever. After burying her father, 22-year-old Vivian found herself responsible for a 13-year-old brother with no steady income and no clear path forward. Mr. Okon's sister and her husband, who lived in a different state and already had 4 children of their own, offered to take Stanley into their home. They couldn't afford to support both siblings, but they could provide Stanley with food, shelter, and school fees. I promise I'll work hard and bring you to live with me as soon as I can, Vivian whispered to Stanley the night before he left with their aunt and uncle. I know you will, Sister Vivi, Stanley replied, trying to be brave. Just don't forget about me. When a friend mentioned that a young professional woman in Lagos was looking for domestic help, offering accommodation as part of the employment package, Vivian swallowed her pride and applied for the position. It wasn't the future she had planned, but sometimes the most unexpected paths lead to the most extraordinary destinations. Clara's promotion at the bank came with benefits that transformed her lifestyle in ways she had dreamed about since university. The salary increase allowed her to rent a spacious 2-bedroom apartment in Lekki, an upscale area of Lagos, complete with modern fixtures, reliable electricity, and 24-hour security. For the first time in her adult life, Clara felt she was living in a way that matched her professional aspirations. But with success came new pressures. Clara's role as senior relationship manager required her to maintain a certain image. She needed to entertain clients occasionally, attend corporate functions looking impeccable, and present herself as someone whose personal life reflected the same success as her professional achievements. The demands of her position left little time for domestic responsibilities. Clara would leave for work before dawn and return after dark, often carrying files that required evening attention. The beautiful apartment that had been her dream was becoming a source of stress as she struggled to maintain it alongside her career demands. Clara told herself she was simply being practical when she decided to hire domestic help. Successful people needed support systems to maintain their success. But deep down, she enjoyed having someone whose circumstances reminded her daily of how far she had risen in the world. When her colleague Funmi mentioned knowing someone perfect for the position, a young lady from Cross River State, very educated but currently looking for domestic work, Clara arranged to meet with the potential employee. When Vivian arrived for the interview, Clara's first impression was surprise at how young and articulate she appeared. During their conversation, Clara was impressed by Vivian's respectful manner, clear communication, and obvious intelligence, though she found it unusual that someone with university education would seek domestic work. The position involves cleaning, cooking, and general household management, Clara explained. The accommodation is a room in the boys' quarters, separate servant accommodations, and meals are provided when I'm home. Clara made her decision on the spot. Something about Vivian's combination of intelligence, humility, and obvious need convinced her that this arrangement would work well for both of them. 3 months after Vivian began working for Clara, their routine had settled into a comfortable pattern. Vivian proved to be everything promised. She maintained the apartment to impressive standards, cooked meals that made Clara look forward to eating at home, and managed household affairs with efficiency that freed Clara to focus entirely on her demanding career. But Vivian was observing more than Clara realized. During the months she worked in the apartment, Vivian witnessed Clara's true character through overheard phone conversations and observed interactions. She noticed how Clara spoke dismissively about people when they weren't present, especially about a man named Simon whom she was seeing again after years apart. Simon is still stuck in village mentality, Clara would complain to her friends during their visits. He's obsessed with farming like we haven't moved into the 21st century. I don't know what I was thinking trying to reconnect with him. Most troubling to Vivian was how Clara and her friends discussed men purely in terms of financial benefits, while Clara simultaneously entertained another man named DJ who represented everything she valued in material success. The women would analyze different men like investment opportunities, focusing solely on what those relationships could provide materially. Vivian had met Mr. Simon during his few visits to see Clara. He seemed like a decent, respectful man who never bothered anyone and always treated people with courtesy, including her. Clara's dismissive attitude toward him puzzled Vivian, especially since his character appeared far superior to that of the flashy DJ whom Clara clearly preferred. On a day that Vivian would never forget, she had gone to the local market to buy food for herself. Clara had left the house earlier, and Vivian knew from overheard conversations that Clara was spending the day with DJ, as she often did. As Vivian walked back from the market carrying her purchases, she saw Mr. Simon standing at the compound gate. When she greeted him and asked why he wasn't inside, he explained that no one had answered when he knocked, and he was waiting for Clara, who had told him she would be home. Vivian knew that Clara might not come home that day. As they stood talking, the weather, which had been threatening all afternoon, suddenly turned severe. Heavy rain began falling with the intensity that characterizes Lagos downpours, the kind that turns streets into rivers and sends everyone running for shelter. "Mr. Simon, please come inside to get out of the rain," Vivian offered, concerned for his welfare as the downpour intensified. Vivian led Simon to her small room in the boys' quarters and offered him a towel to dry off. She explained that Clara had gone out and she didn't know when she would return. As the Lagos rain fell with the intensity that turned streets into rivers, Vivian watched this patient man who had been abandoned by someone who claimed to care for him. As the rain continued for hours, Vivian, who had been planning to cook her dinner, offered to share her meal with Simon. In her small room, as she shared her simple meal with him, she saw something Clara had missed entirely: a man whose character was worth more than all the flashy cars and expensive gifts in Lagos. Simon was genuinely impressed by Vivian's cooking, but more than that, he was struck by her kindness, intelligence, and humble character. This was the first time he had really talked with Vivian, and during their conversation, he learned about her background, how she had been forced to drop out of university after losing her parents, and how someone with such a promising future had ended up working as domestic help. Simon was moved by Vivian's story and impressed by her dignity despite her circumstances. Here was a young woman who had sacrificed her education to care for her dying father and ensure her younger brother had somewhere to live, yet she carried herself with grace and spoke with intelligence that reflected her true potential. When the rain finally stopped, Simon called an Uber and left, but the encounter had affected him deeply. For the first time in months, he had met someone whose values aligned with his own, someone who understood that true worth isn't measured in material possessions but in character and sacrifice. The next morning, when Vivian went to perform her usual duties, she mentioned to Clara that Mr. Simon had come the previous day and waited for her in the rain. Clara's response was dismissive and cold. "What does he want? Why did he come without calling first? I was busy yesterday." In that moment, Vivian understood everything she needed to know about her employer's heart. While Simon had waited patiently in the rain, Clara had been out with another man, and now she was irritated by his devotion rather than moved by it. Sometimes, Vivian realized, the most revealing moments come not from what people do, but from what they fail to feel. As Vivian continued her morning tasks, she found herself thinking about the contrast she had witnessed: a man who waited patiently in the rain for someone who didn't value him, and a woman who took their devotion for granted while chasing after superficial attractions. Sometimes, she reflected, the most important moments happen when we're simply trying to be kind to another human being. After his encounter with Vivian during the rainstorm, Simon found himself increasingly troubled by Clara's attitude and behavior. The contrast between Vivian's genuine kindness and Clara's dismissive response to his visit crystallized feelings that had been building for months. Simon had been with Clara for 6 months now, since their reconnection, but their relationship felt more like an obligation than a partnership. Clara had only visited his apartment twice during their entire relationship, both times making pointed comments about how modest his living arrangements were. She seemed embarrassed by where he lived, and constantly hinted that he should upgrade to something more befitting her status expectations. For his part, Simon had deliberately chosen not to discuss the full extent of his business success with Clara. Her obvious lack of interest in his agricultural work and her barely concealed disdain for farming had taught him that she wouldn't appreciate or understand his achievements in that field. Every time he tried to share his enthusiasm about crop yields, new techniques, or business expansion, Clara would change the subject or respond with polite disinterest. Simon realized then that their relationship had become a performance where he was constantly auditioning for a role he didn't want to play. Clara needed a man who could fund her lifestyle dreams, while he needed a partner who could appreciate the life he was building. They were no longer even speaking the same language. Clara was always on her phone when they were together, constantly wanting expensive trips Simon couldn't afford during critical farming seasons. "I want to go to Dubai," Clara announced one evening during dinner at an upscale restaurant she had chosen. Dubai, an expensive Middle Eastern destination that would cost more than many families earned in months. "Clara, it's harvest season," Simon explained patiently. "I need to be helping my father on the farm, and with my job responsibilities, I can't take time for international travel right now." Clara's expression hardened. "It's always the farm with you. Don't you want more out of life than dirt and crops?" Her disdain for his agricultural work was barely concealed, and Simon felt the familiar sting of being misunderstood by someone who claimed to care about him. Another time, Clara suggested they spend a week at an expensive resort in Abuja, Nigeria's capital city, staying in luxury accommodations that would cost a fortune. "That's not something I can do right now," Simon replied honestly. Clara lost her temper completely. "What is the point of having a man who cannot take care of me? What kind of future are we building together?" Simon looked at her steadily before responding. "We all have priorities, Clara. I'm planning for the future, so I can take care of myself and my wife properly." Clara scoffed at his response, clearly unconvinced that Simon's version of planning would ever meet her expectations. The following week, when Simon called Clara, she didn't answer her phone. It took her 3 days to return his call, and when she finally did, it was only to inform him that she had taken the Abuja trip anyway, going with her friends to the expensive resort she had wanted him to pay for. "I'm enjoying myself," Clara said with a tone that suggested she was proving a point. "I'll talk to you when I get back." Simon also suspected that Clara was seeing other men, though he had no concrete proof. Her frequent absences, the expensive gifts she couldn't account for, and her general lack of investment in their relationship all pointed to someone whose attention was divided among multiple romantic interests. On a Sunday afternoon after church, Simon made a decision that would end one chapter of his life and begin another. Instead of calling ahead as he usually did, he decided to pay Clara a surprise visit. Perhaps seeing each other spontaneously, without the formal arrangements that had characterized most of their recent interactions, might help them reconnect, or at least have an honest conversation about their relationship's future. As Simon approached Clara's compound, he immediately noticed something that made his heart sink. Vivian was sitting outside the gate in the fading Sunday light, looking small and vulnerable, with a single bag beside her that obviously contained everything she owned. The sight of this dignified young woman, who had shown him such kindness, now homeless and alone, stirred something protective in Simon's chest. "Vivian?" Simon called out, approaching her with concern. "What's wrong? What happened?" Vivian looked up at him with eyes that held both sadness and resignation. "Mr. Simon, Clara just fired me and asked me to leave immediately." Simon was shocked. In all his interactions with Vivian, she had been nothing but respectful, hardworking, and professional. The idea that Clara would suddenly dismiss her, especially on a Sunday evening when finding alternative accommodation would be nearly impossible, seemed both cruel and inexplicable. "Wait here," Simon told Vivian gently. "Let me go talk to Clara." Maybe we can sort this out, or at least arrange for you to stay until tomorrow, so you can find proper accommodation. Vivian shook her head sadly. Mr. Simon, please don't trouble yourself. I don't think what happened today can be sorted out. But Simon was already walking toward the house, his sense of justice and concern for Vivian's welfare overriding her protests. He knocked on Clara's door, and when she opened it, her expression immediately showed impatience and annoyance at his unexpected arrival. Simon, what are you doing here? I wasn't expecting you today. Am I supposed to make an appointment to see you now? Simon replied, noting her unwelcoming attitude. Well, I have somewhere I need to be, so this is not a good time, Clara responded, clearly eager to get rid of him. Simon looked at her directly. Clara, I just saw Vivian sitting outside with her belongings. It's already 4 o'clock in the evening, on a Sunday. Why did you fire her at this time of day? Is there something she did wrong? Maybe she can apologize, and you can take her back, or at least let her stay the night and leave tomorrow morning when she can find proper accommodation. Clara's reaction was immediate and explosive, her voice rising to a pitch that made Simon step back. Why are you asking me about that stupid girl? You don't know what she did. Clara began ranting angrily, but her explanations were vague and contradictory. She accused Vivian of being disrespectful and overstepping boundaries, but when Simon pressed for specific details, Clara became more agitated and evasive. She was getting too comfortable, acting like she owned the place, Clara said, her voice rising. I don't need to explain myself to anyone about my domestic help. Simon could see that Clara was hiding something. Her anger seemed disproportionate to any reasonable workplace issue, and her refusal to show basic human decency toward someone in need revealed a side of her character that made him question everything he thought he knew about the woman he'd been dating. As Clara's tirade continued, Simon realized he was witnessing the true measure of her character. The woman standing before him, showing such callousness towards someone vulnerable, was revealing values so incompatible with his own that he wondered how he had missed it for so long. Clara became increasingly agitated as Simon continued to question her about firing Vivian on a Sunday evening. Her breathing became rapid and shallow, her hands trembling with barely contained fury, and her voice rose to levels that made Simon take another step back. Clara's carefully maintained composure cracked like a broken mask. I do not know why you are concerning yourself with a housegirl. You don't know what she did. She screamed, her voice rising to a pitch that made neighbors' lights come on in nearby apartments. Simon had never seen Clara lose control like this before. The polished, professional woman he thought he knew was revealing something ugly and shocking beneath the surface. Clara, calm down, Simon said firmly. There's no need to be disrespectful. Vivian is a young lady, and it's not safe for her to be out on the streets at this hour. But Clara was beyond reasoning. The stress of her deception being discovered, combined with her fury at being questioned, unleashed a torrent of venom that exposed her true character. If you're so concerned about her, take her to your tiny apartment. Clara spat, her voice dripping with contempt. I have somewhere important to be. Without another word, Clara grabbed her purse and car keys, pushed past Simon, and stormed out of her own apartment. She got into her car and drove away, leaving Simon standing in her living room, stunned by what he had just witnessed. Simon stood in Clara's living room, the silence deafening after her explosive exit. In that moment, he realized he had been dating a stranger. The woman who had just driven away bore no resemblance to the Clara he thought he had been dating. This was not just about incompatibility, this was about fundamental decency, and Clara had shown that she lacked it entirely. Simon walked back outside to where Vivian still sat by the gate, her small bag beside her, and her face reflecting quiet resignation to whatever fate awaited her. When she looked up at him, her expression showed she expected no good news. I'm sorry, Simon said as he approached her. Clara wouldn't listen to reason. Vivian looked up at him with eyes that held sadness but no bitterness, resignation but no self-pity. Even in her moment of crisis, she showed more grace than Clara had displayed during their entire relationship. Thank you for trying. Mr. Simon, Vivian said quietly. I knew it wouldn't make any difference, but I appreciate that you cared enough to ask. Vivian, do you have somewhere safe to stay tonight? Simon asked, genuinely concerned about her welfare. I have some money saved, Vivian replied quietly. Enough for a few nights in a budget hotel while I look for another position. Simon found himself making a decision that felt both spontaneous and inevitable. I have a better idea. My cousin lives not far from here, and she has a spare room. She's a widow, a good woman who would welcome having someone to stay with her. Would you be comfortable with that arrangement, just for tonight? Vivian looked at him with cautious hope. Mr. Simon, you don't need to trouble yourself with my problems. You've already been kind enough. It's no trouble, Simon assured her. Come, let me take you there, and tomorrow we can figure out a more permanent solution. As they rode in the Uber to his cousin's house, Simon found himself making an even more significant decision. Vivian, I have a proposition for you. I need someone to help with cooking, cleaning, and general household management. The pay would be better than what Clara was giving you, and you could stay with my cousin and commute to my apartment daily. Would you be interested? Vivian turned to look at him, surprise evident in her eyes. You would trust me in your home? Mr. Simon? Based on what I've observed of your character, yes, Simon replied honestly. You're intelligent, hardworking, and trustworthy. I think this arrangement could benefit both of us. When they arrived at his cousin's house, Simon introduced Vivian to Auntie Adunni. The auntie was a mark of respect for an older cousin in her 50s, who immediately took Vivian under her wing like a mother hen protecting a lost chick. You're safe here, my dear, Auntie Adunni assured Vivian, showing her to the spare room. Simon is a good man, and if he vouches for you, then you're family. As Simon prepared to leave, he turned to Vivian one final time. Get some rest tonight. Tomorrow, we'll start fresh. And Vivian? What happened today with Clara says nothing about your worth as a person. Don't let her treatment make you think otherwise. Vivian's eyes filled with tears of gratitude. Thank you, Mr. Simon. I don't know how to repay your kindness. Just be yourself, Simon replied with a gentle smile. That's more than enough. As Simon rode back to his own apartment that night, he reflected on the day's events. He had entered Clara's apartment intending to end a relationship that had been slowly suffocating him. Instead, he had witnessed a display of cruelty that made his decision effortless. Clara's treatment of Vivian had revealed everything he needed to know about her character, while Vivian's grace under pressure had shown him something rare and valuable. The relationship that had been draining his energy was finally over, and he had been able to help someone who truly deserved assistance. As he settled into sleep that night, Simon felt a peace he hadn't experienced in months. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for the first time in a long while, he looked forward to facing them. The next morning, Simon arrived at his cousin's house to find Vivian already awake, helping Sister Adunni prepare breakfast. Despite everything she had endured the previous day, Vivian moved around the kitchen with quiet efficiency, her natural inclination to be useful overriding any self-pity she might have felt. This girl is a blessing, Sister Adunni whispered to Simon as Vivian stepped outside to hang laundry. She woke up early, helped with cooking, and has been nothing but respectful and grateful. You chose well in helping her. Simon watched Vivian through the window, noting how she had transformed what could have been a morning of despair into one of productivity and purpose. Her resilience impressed him. When they arrived at Simon's apartment, Vivian looked around the modest space with professional eyes, already planning how to organize and improve the living situation. The apartment was small but well-appointed, clearly belonging to someone with good taste but simple preferences. This is lovely, sir, Vivian said genuinely. What most people didn't was that this modest apartment was just one of Simon's residences. His main home was a beautiful house in Banana Island, an exclusive area of Lagos, but he had maintained this smaller place for convenience and privacy. After his experiences with status seekers, Simon had learned the value of keeping his true circumstances private until he could trust someone's character completely. Over the following weeks, Vivian transformed Simon's small apartment into something that truly felt like home. She arrived each morning with a smile and a plan, preparing nutritious meals, maintaining the space with meticulous care, and creating an atmosphere of warmth and comfort that Simon had never experienced since he left home. Unlike Clara, who had always made Simon feel that his lifestyle wasn't quite enough, Vivian seemed genuinely content with simplicity. She took pride in making the modest apartment shine, found creative ways to stretch the household budget, and never once suggested that Simon needed to upgrade his surroundings. "Your dinner is in the warmer" became a familiar note that Simon would find on his kitchen counter during his longer workdays. Vivian would prepare his meals with the same care, whether he was home to eat with her or arriving late from business trips. But it was during their evening conversations that Simon began to truly appreciate Vivian's mind. She would ask thoughtful questions about his work, listen with genuine interest to his challenges and successes, and offer insights that often surprised him. "You mentioned the pepper harvest was smaller this year," Vivian said one evening as they shared tea after dinner. "Have you considered diversifying the crop rotation, or is the soil better suited to specialization?" Simon looked at her with new appreciation. "How do you know about crop rotation?" "My grandmother had a small farm," Vivian replied. "I spent summers there as a child. She always said the land will give you what you need, if you treat it with respect." These moments of connection became the highlight of Simon's days. Here was someone who not only accepted his agricultural work, but understood and respected it. More than that, Vivian brought her own knowledge and perspective to their conversations, making Simon feel truly heard in a way that Clara never had. As months passed and Simon observed Vivian's dedication, integrity, and work ethic, he made a decision that would change the trajectory of her life. During one of their evening conversations, he brought up a subject that had been on his mind for weeks. "Vivian, you mentioned that you were in your third year of software engineering before your circumstances changed," Simon said carefully. "Have you thought about returning to complete your degree?" Vivian's face showed a mixture of longing and resignation. "Of course I think about it, sir. But it's not realistic right now. I need to work, and I'm saving every naira's Nigerian currency I can to help support Stanley and my aunt's family. University fees are beyond my reach for the foreseeable future. What if I told you there might be a way to do both?" Simon asked. "Work and study at the same time?" Vivian looked at him skeptically. "I don't understand." Simon had been researching universities and programs, and he had discovered that with Vivian's excellent grades, she could transfer her credits and complete her final 2 years at the University of Lagos, UNILAG. The schedule could be arranged to accommodate working hours, and with proper planning, she could graduate within 2 years. "I'm willing to help with the fees," Simon said simply. "Consider it an investment in someone I believe has tremendous potential." Vivian stared at him in shock. "Mr. Simon, I can't accept such generosity. The fees alone would be more than I could repay in years of work." "Then don't think of it as something to repay," Simon replied. "Think of it as an investment in your future. When you graduate and find a good position, you can help other young people the way I'm helping you now." The conversation that followed was emotional and profound. Vivian had tears in her eyes as she tried to express her gratitude, while Simon found himself moved by her humility and determination to be worthy of his investment. "Why are you doing this for me?" Vivian asked through her tears. Simon considered his answer carefully. "You've shown me more integrity in a few months than I've seen from many people I've known for years. Investing in someone like you isn't charity, it's wisdom." Within a month, the arrangements were complete. Vivian had been accepted as a transfer student at UNILAG, starting her 4th year of software engineering. She would attend classes 3 days a week and continue working for Simon on the remaining days. The commute was manageable, and Sister Adeni had agreed to let Vivian continue staying with her throughout her studies. The day Vivian received her acceptance letter, she hugged Simon with such genuine joy and gratitude that he felt his own heart fill with warmth. As Vivian prepared to restart her university career, she made a promise to both Simon and herself. "I won't let you down, sir. I'll work harder than I ever have before, and I'll make sure your faith in me was justified. Simon smiled, already confident that Vivian would exceed every expectation. I have no doubts about that. Vivian, you've already proven the type of person you are. Now you're just adding credentials to match it. The transformation was remarkable. The young woman who had been sitting outside Clara's gate with her belongings in a small bag was now a university student with a bright future ahead of her. She remained humble, hardworking, and grateful for every opportunity she received. As Simon watched Vivian embrace this new chapter, he realized that helping her had enriched his own life in unexpected ways. He felt satisfied that his resources were being used for something truly meaningful. Tomorrow could bring new challenges for both of them, but Simon looked forward to seeing where Vivian's journey would take her next. As Vivian settled into her studies, Simon noticed her longing when she spoke about her younger brother Stanley, who was still living with their aunt in Cross River. I haven't seen Stanley in over a year, Vivian said one evening, her voice filled with emotion. I send money for his school fees and upkeep, but I miss him terribly. Stanley is 13 now, he's growing up without me. Simon could see how much this separation weighed on Vivian's heart. When she mentioned wanting to visit Stanley during her next long break from school, Simon surprised her by purchasing her first airplane ticket. Mr. Simon, this is too much, Vivian protested when he handed her the ticket. I could take a bus. A young woman traveling alone on those long bus routes isn't safe, Simon replied practically. Besides, you work hard and deserve to travel comfortably to see your brother. As Vivian sat in the airport departure lounge, she stared at her boarding pass with wonder. I never imagined I would fly in an airplane, she said softly. When I was small, I would watch them pass overhead and dream about where they were going. The reunion with Stanley was emotional and joyful. The 13-year-old boy had grown considerably since their father's death 2 years earlier, but he still ran to Vivian with the excitement of someone who had missed his beloved sister deeply. Stanley was doing well in school and had adjusted to living with their aunt's family, but the bond between the siblings remained as strong as ever. When Vivian returned to Lagos, she was filled with renewed energy and gratitude for the opportunities Simon had provided. She threw herself into her studies with even greater determination, knowing that her success would eventually allow her to provide better support for Stanley's future. As Vivian progressed through her year at university, she found herself wanting to find ways to truly repay Simon for everything he had done for her. When he mentioned that he would be spending several weeks at the farm during harvest season, she saw an opportunity. Mr. Simon, Vivian said one evening, you mentioned that you'll be going to Ondo to work on the farm for some weeks. Would it be possible for me to come with you? I'd like to help with the harvest work. Simon looked at her with surprise. Vivian, that's farm labor, physical work in the sun. You have your studies to think about. I want to help, Vivian insisted. You've given me so much, and I need to find ways to contribute beyond just maintaining your apartment. Please let me do this, it's important to me. Despite Simon's concerns about the physical labor and basic conditions, Vivian's persistence convinced him. The conditions there are very different from Lagos, he warned. It's rural living, we'll be staying in a basic house with outdoor facilities. Are you sure you're prepared for that? Vivian smiled confidently. Mr. Simon, I spent a lot of time growing up in a village in Cross River. My grandfather's house had similar facilities. I haven't forgotten how to live simply. When they arrived at the family compound in Ondo State, Simon took Vivian to his parents' original house, a modest structure maintained near the farm for convenience during harvest seasons. The accommodation was indeed basic: outdoor cooking facilities, a concrete bathroom where buckets of water had to be carried for bathing, and an outdoor toilet. Vivian adapted to these conditions without a single complaint, moving around the space as if she had been living there all her life. At the farm, Vivian impressed everyone with her work ethic. She helped harvest palm fruits in the morning when it was cooler, and worked in the pepper fields in the afternoon, carefully picking the ripe peppers and helping with the sorting process. She adapted to the work without complaint, treating everyone with respect regardless of their position. Simon's foreman, Mr. Akintunde reported back with admiration. She works without complaining, helps others when they struggle, and treats everyone with respect regardless of their position. The workers like her because she doesn't act superior despite being a university student from Lagos. Simon was genuinely impressed that Vivian was truly comfortable with the work and environment. She had not been putting on an act to please him. She genuinely felt at home in the rural setting and found satisfaction in the physical labor of farming. When Simon's parents came to visit one Sunday, Vivian prepared a traditional meal of pounded yam, a staple Nigerian food, and egusi soup, a traditional Nigerian dish, in the outdoor kitchen. She served them respectfully and then gave the family privacy to visit, showing the kind of cultural awareness and respect that spoke to her upbringing. Simon, Mama Grace said as they enjoyed the meal, "This young woman has been raised well. She knows how to work hard and doesn't think any honest labor is beneath her." Papa Samuel nodded in agreement. "She understands the value of hard work and treats everyone with dignity. You can tell much about a person by watching how they behave when they think no one important is looking." During their conversations at the farm, Vivian showed genuine interest in learning about farming practices. "The pepper plants seem to need more water than the palm trees," she observed one afternoon. "Palm trees have deeper root systems," Simon explained. "They can access groundwater that the pepper plants can't reach, so the peppers need more surface irrigation." These exchanges revealed that Vivian was not just helping out of obligation, but was genuinely interested in understanding the work that had built Simon's success. When they returned to Lagos, Vivian had gained a deeper understanding of Simon's work and genuine appreciation for agricultural production. She continued to excel in her studies, approaching graduation with excellent grades. Back in their evening routine, Simon found himself looking forward to their conversations in ways he hadn't before. When Vivian shared updates about her classes or asked questions about his business, he listened with an attention that surprised him. "Thank you again for letting me come to the farm," Vivian said one evening as she prepared to leave for Sister Aduni's house. "I understand now why you love that work so much." Simon smiled, watching her gather her books and bag. "Thank you for your help during harvest. My parents were impressed." As Vivian walked toward the door, Simon realized he was already anticipating tomorrow's conversation. Vivian was now approaching her university graduation, and somehow, their daily interactions had become the part of his day he valued most. As Vivian's final year progressed, she needed to secure an internship for her mandatory industrial training. The competition was fierce, with hundreds of students applying for limited positions at reputable technology companies. "I've applied to several companies," Vivian told Simon one evening. "The process is quite competitive, but I'm hopeful something will work out." Simon listened thoughtfully, though he didn't mention his quiet recommendation to a business associate who owned one of the companies on her list. 2 weeks later, Vivian burst into the apartment with excitement. "Simon, you won't believe it. I got accepted at TechFlow Solutions, one of the best companies I applied to." Simon smiled, genuinely pleased to see her joy. "That's wonderful, Vivian. I'm sure they recognized your potential." During her internship, reports filtered back through Simon's business network about Vivian's exceptional performance. She was described as brilliant, resourceful, and a quick learner who impressed supervisors with her work ethic. On graduation morning, Vivian was surprised to see Simon arriving at the university ceremony. She had mentioned the date in passing, but hadn't expected him to attend. "Simon," she exclaimed, approaching him with her degree certificate in hand. "I can't believe you came." "I wouldn't have missed it," Simon replied warmly. "This is an important day, and I'm proud of what you've accomplished." To celebrate, Simon took Vivian to one of Lagos's finest restaurants for lunch. As they sat in the elegant dining room, Vivian felt overwhelmed by how much her life had changed since that rainy evening when she had been sitting outside Clara's compound with her belongings in a small bag. "Simon, I don't know how to thank you for everything," Vivian said, her eyes misting with emotion. "Without your help, I would never have been able to finish my degree. You did the work." "Vivian," Simon replied, I simply provided an opportunity. Your success is entirely your own achievement. With graduation complete, Vivian prepared to begin her NYSC, National Youth Service Corps program. Simon had quietly arranged for her to be posted to Lagos, allowing her to remain in the city. At the same time, Sister Adeni was relocating to Abuja. As they discussed living arrangements, Simon made an unexpected proposal. Vivian, since you'll no longer be working for me during your service year, it doesn't make sense to continue the employment arrangement. However, would you be comfortable taking over the lease on the apartment? Vivian was initially reluctant. Simon, I couldn't possibly afford the rent on a place like this. What can you afford? Simon asked practically. When Vivian mentioned the modest amount she could budget for accommodation, Simon nodded. Then that's what you'll pay. Consider it a subletting arrangement. What Vivian didn't know was that Simon owned the apartment building and that her rent payments didn't even cover the utilities. During her service year, Simon became a more frequent visitor to what Vivian now considered her apartment. He would stop by with fresh produce from the farm, often arriving with bags of vegetables and fruits that ensured Vivian never had to worry about groceries. Their relationship had evolved beyond the formal employer-employee dynamic. Vivian no longer called him Mr. Simon, he was simply Simon now. Their conversations had become more personal, covering everything from her experiences teaching at the government school where she was posted, to his challenges managing the agricultural business. One evening, as they sat sharing a meal that Vivian had prepared, she mentioned something that had been puzzling her for months. Simon, there's something I don't understand, Vivian said thoughtfully. When I was working for Clara, she and her friends always talked about you as if you were struggling financially. But the way you live, your generosity, the quality of everything in this apartment, none of it matches what they described. Simon set down his fork and looked at her directly. What do you think about that discrepancy? I think Clara never really knew you, Vivian replied. She saw what she expected to see, or maybe what you allowed her to see. Simon smiled at her perceptiveness. You're very observant. Vivian. A few weeks later, Clara made an unexpected appearance at the apartment. Vivian answered a knock at the door to find her former employer standing outside, looking as polished and confident as ever, but with a calculating expression that Vivian remembered well. So he really did take you in, Clara said without preamble, pushing past Vivian into the apartment as if she still had the right to command her. Clara. Simon doesn't live here anymore, Vivian explained calmly. This is my apartment now. Clara looked around the space with obvious confusion and growing anger. Your apartment? How can you afford a place like this? I work and pay my rent like anyone else, Vivian replied with dignity, refusing to be drawn into Clara's obvious attempt to humiliate her. Clara's visit became increasingly unpleasant as she demanded to know where Simon was and accused Vivian of lying about the living arrangements. When she couldn't reach Simon by phone, Clara left in a fury, but not before making several cutting remarks about Vivian's delusions and place in society. After Clara's departure, Vivian found herself shaken by the encounter. The woman's capacity for cruelty and sense of entitlement reminded her of why she had been so relieved to leave that employment situation. When Simon visited later that week, Vivian told him about Clara's unexpected appearance. His reaction was immediate concern for Vivian's comfort and safety. She called me, but I declined the calls. I'm sorry she bothered you, Simon said. If I had known she was here, I would have answered the phone. Clara has a hard time accepting that people can move on and build better lives without her involvement. As they continued talking about Clara's visit, Vivian looked at Simon thoughtfully. You know, you never asked me why Clara fired me that day. Simon paused, considering his response. I felt if you wanted to tell me, you would when you were ready. Weren't you curious? Vivian asked, surprised by his restraint. Not really, Simon replied honestly. I was more focused on helping you, and with Clara's behavior that day, I knew something wasn't right. But now that you bring it up, tell me what really happened. Vivian took a deep breath and began to explain the truth about that Sunday afternoon. Clara had been using my cooking skills to deceive Deji, pretending the meals I prepared were her own work. She had given me the day off, and I had gone to church for a ministry meeting. When I got back, Clara was in a panic because Deji had decided to come for lunch, and she had to cook without me. Simon listened intently as Vivian continued. When Deji complained about the terrible food, and I defended myself by saying I hadn't cooked it, just served it as Clara asked me to do, everything fell apart. Deji realized it was Clara's cooking that was terrible, not mine. Clara was so embarrassed and angry that she blamed me for exposing her lie and fired me on the spot. Simon's expression grew darker as he processed the story. So Clara was using you to deceive her boyfriend, and when her deception was exposed, she punished you for telling the truth? Essentially, yes, Vivian confirmed. She needed someone to blame, and I was convenient. Simon shook his head in disgust. The level of selfishness and dishonesty in that behavior is staggering. She built a relationship on lies, used your skills to maintain those lies, and then destroyed your livelihood when the truth came out. I'm actually grateful it happened, Vivian said quietly. If it hadn't, I would never have met you, never gone back to school, never had all these opportunities. Simon reached across the table and took her hand gently. Vivian, what Clara did to you was wrong on every level. But you're right, sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead to the best opportunities. The conversation had brought them closer, sharing this truth that had been unspoken between them. Simon's genuine anger at the injustice Vivian had suffered, and his appreciation for her honesty, deepened the bond that had been growing between them. As Vivian's service year progressed, Simon's visits became the highlight of her week, and she found herself looking forward to their conversations with an anticipation that surprised her. As Vivian's service year neared its end, Simon found himself facing a decision he had been avoiding for months. Their friendship had deepened into something neither of them had openly acknowledged, but the feelings were undeniably there. One evening, as they sat sharing dinner in what had become their comfortable routine, Simon made an announcement that surprised Vivian. I've been thinking about expanding the farm operations, Simon said thoughtfully. There's an opportunity to acquire more land, and I'm considering relocating to Ondo permanently to oversee the expansion. Vivian looked up from her meal, a flicker of something crossing her face. That sounds like a wonderful opportunity, she said carefully. When would you be moving? In a few months, once your service year is complete, Simon replied, watching her reaction closely. I've been wondering, what are your plans after NYSC? Vivian set down her fork, considering her words. I've been applying for software engineering positions here in Lagos. There are several companies that have shown interest, and I need to start building my career properly. Simon nodded, though something in his expression suggested disappointment. Of course, that makes perfect sense. Lagos has much better opportunities for someone with your skills. They finished their meal in relative quiet, both sensing that something significant was shifting between them, but neither willing to address it directly. A few days later, Simon made a decision that would change everything. He had been carrying a secret for too long, and it was time for complete honesty between them. Vivian, Simon said one evening as she prepared to leave for her evening routine. There's something I need to tell you, something I should have shared a long time ago. Vivian turned, sensing the gravity in his voice. What is it? Simon took a deep breath. This apartment, the one you've been renting from me. I don't just lease it. I own this building, and several others like it. Vivian stared at him, processing this information slowly. You own the building? Yes, Simon continued. His voice is gentle but serious. And the farm in Ondo, it's not just a small family operation. We own over 300 acres now, with plans to expand to 500. The palm oil processing plant, the export contracts. Vivian. I'm not the struggling man Clara thought I was. Vivian sank into a chair, her eyes wide with realization. I suspected you were doing better than you let people believe, but I never imagined this much. You suspected? Simon asked, curious about her perception. The quality of everything in this apartment, your generosity, the way you carried yourself, Vivian explained softly. A man who struggles doesn't give so freely. But I never asked questions because it wasn't my place to ask, and because I was grateful for your kindness regardless of how much or how little you had. And now that you know? Simon asked gently. Vivian looked down at her hands, then back up at him with genuine emotion. Now I'm even more grateful, and even more amazed by your humility. You could have chosen anyone, any woman from your social level, but you showed kindness to someone like me. Simon moved closer, kneeling beside her chair. That's exactly why I fell in love with you. Vivian. You saw me, not my bank account, not my possessions, just me. The words hung in the air between them. Vivian looked into Simon's eyes, seeing vulnerability and hope there. You love me, she whispered. I've loved you for months, Simon admitted. From the day you shared your simple meal with me in the rain, to watching you work alongside me at the farm, to seeing you graduate with such dignity and grace. And I can't imagine my life without you in it. Vivian felt tears welling in her eyes. Simon. I don't know what to say. This changes everything. Does it? Simon asked gently. Does knowing about the money change how you feel about me? Vivian shook her head slowly. No, it doesn't change how I feel about you. It makes me understand why you were always so generous, so patient with everyone. You have been blessed, and you use your blessings to bless others. The apartment, the university fees, the airplane ticket to see Stanley. Vivian's voice was filled with emotion as the full extent of Simon's generosity became clear. You gave me back my life, my future. I saw potential in you that was being wasted, Simon replied gently. You deserved every opportunity to succeed. Vivian, what I'm trying to say is, I love you. I've loved you for months. Vivian looked up at him with wonder. You love me? But I'm just. You're not just anything, Simon interrupted softly. You're the woman who showed me kindness when I was a stranger in the rain. You're the woman who worked alongside me at the farm without complaint. You're the woman whose character shines brighter than any wealth I could ever accumulate. Vivian stood up, walking to the window and looking out at the Lagos skyline. For a long moment, she was quiet, processing everything Simon had shared. When she turned back to face him, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. Simon, I need you to know something. When I was sitting outside Clara's gate that day, I felt like my life was over. I had lost everything, my parents, my education, my future. Simon remained quiet, letting her continue. But God used you to restore everything I had lost, and more, Vivian continued, her voice filled with emotion. You didn't just give me a job, you gave me back my dignity. You didn't just pay for my education, you believed in my potential when I had stopped believing in it myself. She walked back to where Simon was standing. You've shown me what real love looks like. Not the kind that demands and takes, but the kind that gives and lifts others up. Simon reached for her hands. So what are you saying? Vivian smiled, the first genuine smile she'd worn since his revelation. I'm saying that I love you too. Simon. I've loved you for longer than I wanted to admit. You are a good man, a godly man, and if you truly want me, then yes. I want to build a life with you. Simon pulled Vivian into his arms, holding her close. I don't want you to give up your career dreams. Vivian. I want to support them. What if we found a way for you to use your software engineering skills to help modernize the agricultural operations? You could build the technology systems we need while still pursuing your own professional goals. Vivian pulled back to look at him, her eyes bright with possibility. You would want that? A wife who works, who has her own professional identity. I want a partner, Simon said simply. Someone who challenges me, who brings her own dreams and ambitions to our marriage. I've seen what you're capable of. Vivian. I want to see you soar. As they held each other in the apartment where their love had quietly grown, both Simon and Vivian felt the rightness of their choice. They had found something rare, a love built on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine appreciation for each other's character. "There's one more thing," Simon said with a smile. "I think it's time you met my parents properly, as the woman I want to marry." Vivian laughed, remembering their approval during the farm visit. "I think they already know, don't they? My mother has been asking when I'm going to stop being foolish and propose to the wonderful young woman who clearly has my heart," Simon admitted. "She said any man who looks at a woman the way I look at you, and doesn't marry her, is either blind or stupid." "And what did you tell her?" Vivian asked, her eyes dancing with amusement. "I told her I was working up the courage to ask the most amazing woman I've ever known to spend her life with me." Simon slipped the ring onto her finger. Both of them knew they were beginning a new chapter, one built on the solid foundation of character, respect, and genuine love. Clara, who had struggled since her mother died, was now engaged to a man who valued her heart above all else. And the man who wanted to find genuine love had discovered it in the most unexpected place. Their love story was just beginning, but it was already built on the strongest foundation of all, the recognition of true character and the choice to value what matters most. The next morning, Simon called his parents to share the news of his engagement. Mama Grace's laughter could be heard through the phone as she exclaimed her joy. "Finally," she said with obvious satisfaction. "I was beginning to think my son had lost his senses, keeping that wonderful girl waiting so long." "Mama, we need to do this properly," Simon said, smiling at Vivian who was listening nearby. "I want to bring Vivian home to meet with you and Papa formally, so we can discuss the marriage arrangements." Of course, Mama Grace replied warmly. "When will you come? I need to prepare properly to welcome my new daughter." Within the week, Simon and Vivian traveled to Ondo State for the formal introduction. As their car pulled into the family compound, Vivian felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. The compound had been transformed for their visit. Extended family members had gathered, and the aroma of traditional foods filled the air. Mama Grace emerged from the house wearing her finest wrapper and head tie, her face beaming with joy. "Welcome, my daughter," she said, embracing Vivian warmly. "Today, you are not a visitor, you are family." Papa Samuel approached with his characteristic dignity, but his eyes were kind as he looked at Vivian. "Young woman, you have brought joy to our son's heart and peace to our minds. We have watched him become a better man because of your influence." Simon's uncles, aunts, and cousins had all come to meet Vivian and hear about the marriage plans. "Tell us about your family, my dear," one of Simon's aunts asked gently. Vivian spoke with quiet dignity about her late parents, her younger brother Stanley, and her circumstances. She was honest about her background, but spoke with the grace that had impressed everyone who met her. "Hardship builds character," Papa Samuel observed thoughtfully. "And character is the foundation of a good marriage. We can see that you have both." The family was unanimous in their approval. They had already seen Vivian's character during her time at the farm, and her respectful demeanor during this visit only confirmed their positive impression. "When do you want to have the wedding?" Mama Grace asked practically. Simon and Vivian exchanged glances. "We were thinking in about 6 months. Mama," Simon replied. "That will give us time to plan properly, and for Vivian to finish her service year." 6 months is good, Papa Samuel agreed. "It gives both families time to prepare, and for us to do everything according to our traditions." Back in Lagos, word of Simon and Vivian's engagement began to spread through their social circles. Simon's business associates were curious about his bride-to-be, while Vivian's friends from university were amazed by her good fortune. "Vivian, you never told us your employer was so wealthy," one of her friends teased during a chance encounter. "Simon is a good man," Vivian replied simply. "His wealth is just one aspect of who he is." The wedding preparations began in earnest. Vivian's aunts and uncles took charge of the traditional arrangements, while Vivian worked with Simon to plan the church ceremony. "I want our wedding to be beautiful, but not wasteful," Vivian told Simon as they discussed the plans. There are so many people in need. I would rather we use our resources to help others than to show off. Simon smiled, once again impressed by Vivian's heart. That's exactly what I was thinking. We'll have a lovely celebration, but we'll also make sure to bless others in the process. They decided to provide a substantial meal for everyone in Simon's village on the wedding day, and to give gifts to the elderly and widows in both their communities. The wedding would be a celebration, but also an act of service. As the months passed, Vivian completed her NYSC program. You have a gift for connecting with young people, the headmaster told her at her farewell ceremony. I hope you'll consider returning to education in the future. Vivian thanked him graciously, though she was already excited about the plans she and Simon had discussed for using her technology skills to modernize his agricultural operations. 3 weeks before the wedding, Clara finally learned about Simon's engagement through mutual acquaintances. The news hit her like a physical blow. Simon is marrying his maid, she asked incredulously when a former colleague mentioned seeing the wedding invitation. That can't be right. But as Clara investigated further, the reality became undeniable. Not only was Simon marrying Vivian, but the scale of the wedding preparations revealed just how wealthy he truly was. Do you know who Simon really is? Her friend asked, enjoying Clara's obvious shock. His family owns one of the largest palm oil operations in Ondo State. They export all over West Africa. The man you thought was struggling is actually a millionaire. Clara felt sick as the full extent of her mistake became clear. The man she had dismissed as unworthy, the man whose simple gifts she had scorned, was wealthier than any of the men she had chased after. And you should see his bride-to-be now, the friend continued, twisting the knife deeper. She's graduated from university, looks absolutely radiant, and everyone says she's the sweetest, most humble person you could meet. Simon's family adores her. That evening, Clara sat in her apartment, surrounded by the material possessions she had accumulated, feeling emptier than she had ever felt in her life. The designer clothes, the expensive furniture, the car she had been so proud of, all of it seemed meaningless now. She thought about Vivian, the young woman she had treated so poorly, who was now preparing to marry the man Clara had let slip away. The irony was devastating. Clara picked up her phone several times, thinking about calling Simon, but what could she say? That she was sorry? That she had made a mistake? That she wanted him back? The truth was, she had never really known Simon at all. She had been so focused on what he couldn't give her that she had never seen what he could offer. And now, it was too late. Meanwhile, across the city, Simon and Vivian were putting the finishing touches on their wedding preparations, surrounded by family and friends who celebrated their love and supported their future together. Are you nervous? Simon asked Vivian one evening as they reviewed the final details. A little, Vivian admitted with a smile. But mostly, I'm grateful. Grateful for how God brought us together, grateful for your family's acceptance, grateful for the chance to build a life with someone who truly sees me. Simon took her hand gently. In 3 weeks, you'll be my wife. And I promise you, Vivian, I will spend every day making sure you never regret saying yes to me. As they sat together, planning their future, both Simon and Vivian felt the deep satisfaction that comes from making the right choices. 2 months before the planned church wedding in Lagos, preparations began for the traditional wedding ceremonies in Bakassi village. Vivian would need to travel ahead to prepare, while Simon's family would make their formal visits according to custom. Are you ready to go home to Bakassi? Simon asked Vivian as they finalized the arrangements. A little nervous, Vivian admitted. It's been so long since I've been back to the village, and so much has changed. I'm not the same person who left there desperate and broken. Simon took her hand gently. You're returning as the accomplished woman you were always meant to be. Your family will be proud of who you've become. 2 weeks before the traditional wedding, Vivian traveled to Bakassi to reunite with her family and help with preparations. When she arrived in the village, she felt a rush of emotions. The familiar sights, the sounds of her childhood, the memories of her parents, all came flooding back. Stanley, now 15 and much taller than when she had last seen him, welcomed his sister with joy and excitement. The 2 weeks gave them precious time to reconnect and for Vivian to help coordinate the wedding preparations with her aunt, Mama Comfort, and her uncles. Papa Samuel had already made the formal introduction visit with Simon's uncles, meeting with Vivian's uncles who stood in for her late father. The bride price had been discussed and agreed upon with the dignity and respect that such occasions required. The traditional wedding ceremony took place with both families fully participating in the customs and celebrations. The village compound was transformed with decorations, traditional music filled the air, and the aroma of local delicacies created a festive atmosphere. Vivian appeared in traditional Bakassi attire, looking radiant and dignified. The ceremonies proceeded with the beauty and meaning that had been passed down through generations, connecting the couple not just to each other but to their cultural heritage. Simon participated in each ritual with respect and joy, showing his appreciation for Vivian's culture and his commitment to honoring her family's traditions. His own family watched with admiration as their son embraced these new customs. During one of the ceremonial exchanges, Mama Grace leaned over to Papa Samuel and whispered, "Look how happy our son is. This is what real joy looks like." Papa Samuel nodded, watching Simon's face as he looked at his bride. "He has found what we prayed he would find, a good woman who will build their home on the right foundation." The celebration continued into the evening, with both families dancing and enjoying the party, laughter, and hopes for the couple's future. As the traditional ceremonies concluded and both families prepared for the journey back to their respective homes, Simon and Vivian took a walk through the village where she spent some holidays. "This is where we used to stay," Vivian said softly, showing Simon the small house where she had stayed with her parents during visits to the village. "My father used to sit under that tree and tell me that education was the key to a better future. He never lived to see me graduate, but I know he would be proud." Simon looked at the modest surroundings that had shaped the woman he loved. "Your parents raised an extraordinary daughter. Their legacy lives on in who you've become." "And now we go back to Lagos for the church wedding," Vivian said, looking toward their future together. "Yes," Simon replied, taking her hand. "But being here with your family, understanding where you come from, this has made me love you even more. You are rooted in something real, something that no amount of money can provide." As they prepared to leave Cross River, both Simon and Vivian carried with them the blessings of both families and the deep satisfaction that comes from honoring tradition. Soon they would return to Lagos for the church wedding, but the foundation of their marriage had been laid here, in the soil of respect, tradition, and genuine love. The morning of the church wedding dawned bright and clear. The church was beautifully decorated with white flowers and elegant arrangements, creating an atmosphere of joy and celebration. Vivian looked radiant in her white wedding gown, a simple but elegant dress that reflected her natural beauty and grace. Stanley, who had traveled from Bakassi for the occasion, walked her down the aisle in place of their late father. "Papa would be so proud," Stanley whispered to his sister as they approached the altar where Simon waited. Simon stood at the altar in his custom-made black suit, looking handsome and peaceful. When he saw Vivian walking toward him, his face lit up with pure joy and love. The ceremony was beautiful and meaningful. Pastor Adeyemi spoke about the importance of character in marriage, about choosing a partner based on their heart rather than their looks, and about the blessing that comes when two people of faith commit to building a life together. "Simon and Vivian," Pastor Adeyemi said during his message, "your love story is a testament to the truth that God knows who we truly are. May your marriage continue to reflect godly values." When it came time for the vows, Pastor Adeyemi led them through the traditional wedding ceremony. "Simon, do you take Vivian to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Simon replied with conviction, his eyes never leaving Vivian's face. "Vivian, do you take Simon to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Vivian answered, her voice clear and joyful. The congregation erupted in joyful celebration as Pastor Adeyemi pronounced them husband and wife before God. As Simon and Vivian kissed, celebrating their union, everyone present felt they had witnessed something truly special. The reception was held at one of Lagos's finest hotels, transforming into a vibrant Nigerian celebration. True to their values, Simon and Vivian had arranged for a portion of the reception costs to be donated to a scholarship fund for orphaned children. During the reception, the couple changed into matching Osso oak fabric. Simon looked regal in his traditional agbada, while Vivian was stunning in an elegant gown with a beautifully tied gilly headwrap. The transformation drew gasps of admiration from their guests. The reception came alive with traditional Nigerian music, joyful dancing, and the infectious energy that makes Nigerian parties legendary. Guests sprayed money on the dancing couple, celebrating their union with exuberant joy. Papa Samuel spoke about watching his son grow into a man of character, while Vivian's uncle praised her resilience and faithfulness through difficult times. Stanley, now confident and articulate, gave a heartfelt speech. "I want to thank Simon for becoming the brother I always needed," he said with genuine emotion. "And I want to celebrate my sister, who never gave up on our family even when everything seemed hopeless." As the evening progressed, Simon and Vivian moved through the crowd, greeting guests and receiving congratulations. Among the well-wishers were some of Simon's business associates who had never met Vivian before. "Your wife is lovely," one businessman told Simon. "She's the best person I know," Simon replied simply, watching Vivian as she graciously thanked their guests. Across the city, Clara sat in her apartment, scrolling through social media photos of Simon and Vivian's wedding that mutual friends had posted. The images showed a celebration filled with genuine joy and love, a stark contrast to the emptiness she felt in her own life. The photos told the story she had missed: Simon's obvious wealth, Vivian's transformation from maid to radiant bride, the love and respect evident between them, and the happiness of everyone present. Clara closed her phone and looked around her apartment. The irony was complete. The maid she had fired in anger was now married to a millionaire, while Clara, with all her education and ambition, was alone with her regrets. As the reception wound down, Simon and Vivian prepared to leave for their honeymoon. They would be traveling to Dubai, the same destination Clara had once demanded Simon take her to, but now it held no significance except as a beautiful place for them to begin their married life. "Are you ready, Mrs. Adebayo?" Simon asked his new wife as they prepared to leave. "I've been ready since the day you waited for me in the rain," Vivian replied with a smile. As their car pulled away from the hotel, both Simon and Vivian reflected on the journey that had brought them together. A simple act of kindness had planted the seeds of love, to this moment when they were beginning their life as husband and wife. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" Vivian asked as they drove through the Lagos night. "Sometimes," Simon admitted. "But I believe everything happened exactly as it was meant to. Every struggle, every disappointment, every moment of doubt, it all led us to each other." Vivian squeezed his hand. "I used to think my life was over when I was sitting outside Clara's gate. I never imagined that losing that job would lead to finding my husband. And I never imagined that the woman who would steal my heart would be the one Clara tried to throw away," Simon replied. "God truly does work in mysterious ways." Their story had begun with a simple act of kindness on a rainy day, and it would continue with a lifetime of choosing each other, supporting each other, and building something beautiful together. The maid had become a wife, the struggling student had become a successful woman, and the man who had waited patiently in the rain had found the love he had been searching for all along. Sometimes, the most beautiful love stories begin in the most unexpected places, and two hearts recognize their true home in each other. Thank you for joining us at African Tales and Hearts, where stories of love, family, and destiny come alive. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss the next story that will touch your heart and inspire your spirit.